Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Amy Furman. I'm the Associate Director for Employer Development with the Career Center and Secretary Treasurer for Staff Senate. We are delighted to bring you today Shani Barrax Moore, who is the new, congratulations on the promotion, Shani, Assistant Vice President for Institutional Equity and Diversity and Director of Diversity and Inclusion. She'll be presenting a summary and the findings of the climate survey that was done a few years back. So we are very excited to hear this information, and this will be recorded, so you'll be able to access this recording in various places on the Staff Senate webpage and elsewhere. But thank you, Shani, for being here, and I will turn it over to you. Also, sorry, I should mention, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat, or we'll have chances at the end to ask Shani some questions.
Okay. We will definitely have chances at the end to ask questions, but if there's anything on a particular slide for which you need immediate clarification, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask. And I apologize in advance that this is a lot of information. So I'm going to kind of whiz through it, but do turn your camera on and unmute yourself if you have questions. Okay, so we are going to jump right in. So as Amy mentioned, this is about the Campus Inclusion Climate Survey that we did in 2018. And for the purposes of this discussion, campus climate refers to the quality and character of university life, and it's based on patterns of university life experienced by the four constituents to whom we distributed the survey: students, faculty, staff, and administrators. It also includes alumni. And the main thing about campus climate is that it reflects norms, goals, values, interpersonal relationships, teaching and learning practices, and organizational structures. And the Campus Inclusion Climate Survey that we did with Viewfinder did address all of those things. So this is a best practice that is used by institutions and organizations across the country. The president's office is doing a separate pulse check that's not necessarily based upon the Campus Inclusion Climate Survey, but this was a very comprehensive survey that we did to solicit and assess employee and student opinions, feelings, perceptions, and expectations regarding a variety of factors relevant to UNT. And really what it allowed us to do was to identify problem areas and opportunities for growth and development, while also even identifying areas of strength that we can build upon. And so what we want to be able to do with this is to improve working relationships and environment for faculty, staff, and students, and to enhance the classroom environment and co-curricular experiences of UNT's student body. So this data really just focuses on staff. And the survey was distributed in late 2018 to those four constituent groups I told you about: students, faculty, staff, and administrators. And we did a lot of disaggregation on purpose because that is where the real story is. So we disaggregated all of the data by race and ethnicity, gender and gender identity, division, and college. So one thing I want to say about the staff data is that the staff data is only disaggregated for academic affairs by division, and that's on purpose because we wanted to protect the anonymity of the respondents. So you won't be able to see the college specific information for staff, but it is available for faculty and for students. And you can read the executive summaries, full questions, recommendations, and all of the data at our climate survey website, ied.unt.edu/climate survey, all one word. That has all the data, but what I'm presenting here are the statistically significant findings, particularly related to staff. We also disaggregated the data for staff by rank, and there's a lot of there related to that too. Okay, so we're just going to jump right in. So the climate survey questions were for employees. We used a different model for students. were broken into 6 inclusion practices, measuring authenticity for a number of different groups. We did have specific questions on the survey data, specific sections for people who identified as having a disability, for veterans who were international, for members of the LGBTQIA+ community, for folks of color. We had a separate section for religion, worldview, and political affiliation, and you will see the data by staff classification. But we also had questions about feeling respected and valued, about psychological safety, which is really important in providing an inclusive climate, involvement in work group, influence on decision-making, and recognizing and advancing diversity. So again, the full data for all of those questions is on our website, but you're just getting what is statistically significant. So you could see here the response rate. Obviously, the highest response that we got was from academic affairs, because there are a lot of staff in academic affairs, followed by student affairs and finance and administration. And we had, for staff, almost 800 responses and a really good confidence interval, so we can be sure that the results are relevant and applicable. Here's some of the information about the staff participation by rank. So you see that the 2 largest groups that took the survey were administrative support and professional non-faculty, followed by servants maintenance, and then skilled crafts and technical paraprofessional were about the same. And so on the website, on the climate survey website, you can see all of the roles that are included in these categorizations. These are the HR categories that HR uses. So, all right, and then here's some information about staff demographics, and pardon me. And these are demographics that we often have not been able to collect. So, as I mentioned, the highest percentages were among professional, non-faculty, and women who are administrative support staff. So that's the biggest chunk of folks that responded. The majority of staff respondents have been employed at UNT 1 to 5 years, and the highest percentages of age ranges were 31 to 40, and both 41 to 50 and 51 to 60 were both at 21%. Of the respondents, and this is where we start getting into the data that we are not usually able to collect, and so the climate survey was helpful for this. So of our staff respondents, 9% identified as lesbian, gay, or bisexual, and 4% identified as genderqueer, which means neither cisgender man or cisgender woman, whose gender identity matches their sex assigned at birth, which is what cisgender means. Of the total responses, 7% preferred not to answer, which is something we're really looking at, because it, makes us wonder if people feel comfortable even disclosing that in the UNT environment. And then among our religious spiritual worldview identities, the next highest identity after Protestant Christians were Roman Catholics. And then we have a fairly sizable population of folks who identify as spiritual, not religious, agnostic, and atheist. So I think that's another finding for us to be mindful of, that for some people, their worldview does not necessarily align with a traditional religion. Here are some findings by gender and race. This is something that we're doing focus groups on, that men overall, particularly white men, feel significantly less strongly that there should be not only required diversity training, but we found that white men specifically, which is why we're trying to do focus groups on them, have far less support for diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts overall. Men, and again, this is primarily white men, believe that UNT is less welcoming to Christians. Women students, however, think UNT is more welcoming to Caucasians and whites than men and all other gender identities. And white students and Latinx students, interestingly, and we're doing focus groups on this too, responded similarly throughout. and believe that UNT is more welcoming to all groups. So we asked a question about, how welcoming is UNT to undocumented students, to students who have different religions, and employees as well. And so our white students and Latinx students responded similarly that UNT is more welcoming to all groups overall as compared to the other racial and ethnic groups. And then Asian American students believe UNT is less welcoming to Asian Americans and international employees and students. So I'm front loading with some overall information so that you can context the staff information. Okay, so here is some staff information that overall, we asked a number of different questions and a number of different statements about people's perceptions of UNT overall. And so overall, and this is consistent with a lot of the other data, that staff agree with the statement that UNT is diverse, but not necessarily inclusive. So we definitely have some work to do in making sure that our employee composition reflects our student composition, and then also making those folks feel included at UNT. So, okay, here are some, I'm getting ready to share with you, the next couple of slides are some of the data by identity. And these are, again, some of the areas around which we are doing focus groups. So this is about the Latinx campus experience related to staff. Overall, our Latinx staff have a more positive campus experience compared to other people of color, particularly compared to African American and Black staff. And we'll see the data for that in a moment. In some cases, such as with the statement, all employees are held to the same code of professional ethics and conduct, our Hispanic and Latinx staff more strongly agree with that, even more so than our Caucasian and white staff. However, our Hispanic and Latinx staff less strongly agree with the statement, efforts to improve university via diverse hiring is effective than their white or Caucasian staff counterpart. So we are doing, again, some focus groups to dig more into this so that we can understand better, both from Latinx staff who are American born and were born in another country, to see if that makes a difference. Because as someone who is half immigrant, I know that my family members who are not American born have a markedly different experience than family members that were born here. So we're going to be exploring that with staff and students as well. One thing that was really statistically significant for students and employees is that members of our African American Black community are feeling markedly more marginalized compared to overall. So compared to all of the other racial and ethnic identities, which isn't really surprising considering some of the things that have happened at UNT within the last couple of years. But overall, African American, and in this case, multiracial staff, and that could be any variety of combinations of two or more races, responded similarly to our African American staff, that they report lower rates of feeling respected and valued, lower rates of psychological safety and involvement, and higher rates of support for diversity and inclusion efforts among our Black and multiracial staff. Also, here was a case where our Black and Native American staff answered similarly, rating the adequacy of resources and services to serve the diversity of UNT as less adequate than other racial and ethnic groups. Because, we have a lot of resources for students, but not as much for employees. And that's something that we're kind of trying to beef up. And overall, African American staff perceive UNT to be less welcoming to all identity groups. So again, when we asked about how welcoming UNT is to, people of different gender identities, race and ethnicity, people of color, all of those things. Our Black staff perceived UNT to be less welcoming to everybody overall. So again, that's something we're going to be talking about in our focus groups. In terms of the statements for African American and Black staff, they less strongly agree with the statements that they're satisfied overall with their actions with other employees. They less agree that UNT puts too much emphasis on diversity, and they less agree that inclusion is a core value of UNT's mission, particularly compared to white and Latinx staff. Again, these are the statistically significant findings. And this is something that we found when we disaggregated the data by race and ethnicity. However, our African American and Black staff more strongly agreed that UNT is diverse but not inclusive compared to white staff. So you saw that that was part of the overall data, but in terms of our Black staff, they more strongly agreed with that statement. And then our Black staff, African American and Black staff, feel less safe on campus compared to staff of other races overall. And then they also feel less safe off campus compared to staff of other races overall. So that kind of even speaks to the psychological safety of how safe that you feel just kind of moving through space on campus. So that's all the information about our African American Latinx staff. Now we're going to move on to the overall data about staff with disabilities. And it should be noted here that we got a lot of really good information about staff with disabilities that's really actionable. The first thing is that most staff with a disability disagreed or didn't know about the process to request accommodations. So that's an area of opportunity. Also, staff with a disability didn't feel comfortable disclosing their disability to request accommodation. So there's a stigma attached to having a disability among staff. And they were more neutral when asked about the services for employees with a disability in human resources, because it's human resources that handles the disability accommodations in addition to equal opportunity for employees, and it's the Office of Disability Access that handles it for students. So they were more neutral about the number of staff, the overall services provided, availability of appointment times, accessibility of the office location, and office hours specifically for human resources staff providing accommodations. And while there was a relatively small sample size, about 60 folks reported disabilities, the highest disability reported was psychiatric. That's also congruent with our student data as well. This is information, so that's all for disability. Again, these are all of the identity-based groups for staff. And this is about our LGBTQIA staff, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, and agender. So in terms of how well their identities are respected, members of that community said their sexual identity is comparatively slightly less respected by administrators compared to faculty, staff, and students. So that was asking about which constituent groups, how different constituent groups respect their identity. And they also feel their gender identity is more respected compared to their sexual identity. However, we did not disaggregate the data to identify if most of the folks answering this question were cisgender or transgender. My guess is that they're probably cisgender, but we've got to look at the data to make sure that that's actually the case. And in terms of their comfort level expressing their identities, they feel largely more comfortable expressing their gender and sexual identity outside of UNT than they do at work. And they also feel that their gender identity is treated with more respect by students than by other employees. So there's certainly an opportunity to cultivate some understanding and acceptance for our queer and trans staff. Here are some additional identity-based perspectives that we found. We talked about the religion, worldview, and spiritual affiliation. While staff generally feel respected about their religious affiliation practices, they disagree with the statement about openly expressing their religious or spiritual beliefs on campus. Similarly, staff veterans Again, these were the parts of the survey for which there were specific sections. Staff veteran respondents feel more respected by staff than by students and faculty. And international respondents indicated NA or don't know about the extent to which the International Student and Scholar Services Office facilitated their readjustment to campus life. And they also said that they're treated with more respect by faculty and students. Again, this is international staff, than by staff and administrators. So there's certainly some opportunity to cultivate some more understanding and inclusion among staff and administrators for our international respondents. Some more of the identity-based perspectives. Staff who are people of color feel more welcome on campus than in the surrounding community. So that's a little flip than a little different than the African-American staff specifically, and they feel more respected by students. Staff of color feel more respected by students than faculty, staff, and administrators, which I'm not surprised by that because there are more staff of color than there are faculty of color. And just speaking from the eye perspective, students will seek out those staff who are of color, just students of color will just seek out anybody of color to try to make connections with. And I know that's something that many staff of color experience from our students. Interesting, our multiracial staff perceived UNT to be less welcoming to specific groups: first generation students, LGBTQIA people, multiracial people, and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders than their white counterparts. And they also perceived, again, multiracial staff, UNT, to be less welcoming to non-Christians than both of their white and Latinx counterparts. So that's all of the identity-based perspectives. And now we're going to move on to the questions that asked about the adequacy of employee resources and services. Because again, we asked about, as it relates to students, how well are we doing with serving the diversity of our employee composition. So overall, staff rated the resources to serve students who are veterans, students with disabilities, LGBTQIA, and people of color specifically, higher than the services to serve employees of those same identities, both staff and faculty. So we clearly have some opportunities for veterans, people with disabilities. We have since started a neurodiversity professional network. We've been looking at starting an LGBTQIA employee ERG because there's a faculty group, but not a staff group. And obviously there are a number of ERGs for people of color. Well, we've got UNITE for our Latinx employees, and we've got the Black Professional Network for our Black staff, and then the Black Faculty Network for Black faculty. Overall, staff are not aware of the staff in the Division of Institutional Equity and Diversity, which includes my Office of Diversity and Inclusion, the Office of Equal Opportunity, and the Multicultural Center and the Pride Alliance. The two centers really serve students, so that's not surprising. Equal Opportunity, you're probably not going to engage with them unless something happened, but again, this survey was done before Diversity and Inclusion started offering open enrollment training, so hopefully more people are aware of us now. And Black and Native American staff rated the adequacy of resources and services to serve the overall diversity of UNT, just overall, as less adequate than other races. Now here are some of the some similar perspectives based upon division. Okay, that was by race and ethnicity. This is by division. So staff and academic affairs and finance and administration, if you recall, that those were two of the largest groups, and I don't know the demographics of this group, but they feel like UNT is more welcoming to all minoritized groups and less welcoming to Caucasian and white folks and Christians. That may be congruent with what we discovered about white males having less support for DEI efforts. Student affairs, conversely, feels like UNT is less welcoming to all minoritized groups. And minoritized is just a different way of saying all of the historically underrepresented groups. And we don't say minorities anymore, at least I don't. Research Innovation and Office of the President, the staff there rated the adequacy of resources and services to serve the diversity of UNT better than overall staff. So a lot of different perspectives there by division. So one of the things that we found out too is that staff are not having as much of an opportunity to serve on search committees as faculty and administrators. So that is one area that there's really an area of opportunity to allow staff and have staff being more involved in that process, particularly I would say in academic affairs, which I think a lot of times those search committees are heavily populated by faculty. So, you know, one of the things that I've been advocating is for positional inclusion. And that is one of the ways that we can do that, is to engage staff more on search committees. Okay, so there was a whole section of the Campus Inclusion Climate Survey that asked whether you had witnessed or experienced instances of harassment, discrimination, and bias. And so I'm going to share with you the overall data and then some of the disaggregated data. So overall, about half of students and employees have experienced at least one incident of harassment, discrimination, and bias. That might be why EO is so busy. And then, however, most of the instances have been horizontal, i.e. Student to student, staff to staff, or faculty to faculty. However, most of the people who experienced didn't report it because they thought it wasn't important enough, or they didn't feel anything would happen. Administrators specifically, and again, you can look on our website to see all of how we categorized staff and administrators. Administrators fear retaliation. So I think that's really interesting there, that despite positional power, that does not protect administrators from fearing retaliation. Also, and this is a huge finding, the most frequent types of incidents are bullying. That was reported by all staff, retaliation, and among people of color, race and ethnicity. Those were the most frequent instances of harassment, discrimination, or bias. I will tell you that we are currently looking at something like a civility code to address bullying, because, you know, I can speak from the I perspective. I've seen and witnessed it, and none of our policies speak to bullying. That a lot of the bullying behaviors don't rise to the level of harassment, discrimination, or bias. So we've got to do something, because bullying is the one thing that was pervasive across all employees. So there's clearly an area, some areas of opportunity to minimize bullying at UNT for everybody. So now here is the data specific to staff. The highest rate of discrimination, bias, or harassment is based on age, primarily towards younger staff, 25 to 40, which I'm not surprised by. I've been in higher education a long time. And when I turned 40, I told everybody, because I felt like that was the magic age that people seem to feel like, you know what it is you're talking about. And then for staff after that, after age, for younger staff, there's bullying again, followed by gender, race and ethnicity, political views, and religion. And again, these offenses were horizontal, staff to staff, followed by faculty and administrators that they came from. Most were not reported by staff. So I guess EO isn't as busy as we think that they are, because number one, they didn't think anything would happen, which is also congruent with the fact that bullying is such a, there's a prevalence of bullying, but we don't have a policy for that. They also thought it wasn't important enough, and that they feared retaliation and losing their job specifically. So huge opportunity there to address the climate for staff and even just self-advocacy for a climate of bullying and retaliation. So that's something that I hope Staff Senate will look at addressing. So here are some instances of discrimination by rank. And so I've given, I'll give you the perspectives by all the different ranks. For administrative support staff, there's bullying again. Highest rates for bullying, followed by age discrimination, gender discrimination, and political views discrimination. For service maintenance workers, the highest rates of harassment, discrimination or bias were a perceived lack of English language proficiency, followed by retaliation again, and sexual assault, which is really very, that's something to look into among service maintenance workers. For skilled crafts, the highest rates were gender identity discrimination, race and ethnicity discrimination, medical condition or illness, disability, and then sexual identity. And then finally, for technical paraprofessional, the highest rates were religion, worldview, spiritual affiliation discrimination, followed by socioeconomic status discrimination. So again, some of the reasons for staff not reporting instances, again, overall, they didn't think it was important enough. This is overall, didn't think anything would happen, feared retaliation, feared losing their job, and didn't think the university would support them. So again, lots of opportunities for Staff Senate to explore these collaboratively across the institution. And here's the other thing. Another key finding is that most of the staff who did report instances of harassment, discrimination, or bias said that the outcomes of the filed complaints were not to their satisfaction. And so that's an opportunity to learn more about that. But again, it may be because bullying is the most pervasive kind and we don't have a policy for that. So here are the staff perspectives of support for D&I efforts by rank. Our technical and paraprofessional staff, more than other groups, agreed about a lot of the questions about accountability and folks participating in mandatory diversity training. Our technical paraprofessional staff agreed everybody needs training. Administrative leadership, faculty, housing and residence life staff, search committee chairs, staff members, students and teaching assistant, teaching fellows. And they more strongly agreed that senior leadership need to show a visible commitment to university diversity compared to all of the other staff ranks. So that was interesting. Skilled crafts, conversely, less than all other groups agreed about the same thing, about those groups getting diversity training. So our technical paraprofessional staff are more supportive of DEI efforts, and overall, and our skilled craft staff are less supportive overall. Would be interesting for us to disaggregate the race and ethnicity data to see if that aligns with some of the identity-based perspectives of those groups. So we're at the end here. And so a couple of questions that came up for the overall presentation that we did is what are we doing next? So we are doing focus groups for members of the African-American community, both students and employees, to determine the nature of marginalization. We're doing student and employee focus groups for white men, although we're having a very difficult time getting participants for those focus groups, which may be also indicative of our white males not really engaging with DEI efforts. We are going to talk about race and ethnicity discrimination for people of color and for people with disabilities, trying to find out why they don't want to disclose to receive accommodations so that we can create a more inclusive climate for people with disabilities. I mentioned that we do have a new neurodiversity professional network to which I actually belong, and they actually just did we had a event on March 30th, where we brought John Elder Robeson to talk about neurodiversity and the benefits even of neurodiversity. And then I mentioned that we're working with human resources, or I did mention that we're looking at staff exit interviews, because right now we do exit interviews for faculty, but we do not do them for staff. So we are looking at involving staff more in the search committee process and training, and doing exit interviews for staff. We are, as I mentioned, exploring a civility code for the bullying and retaliation harassment. The retaliation should be covered in our policies, but I don't think the bullying is. We started a Who We Are series that's on the Division of Institutional Equity and Diversity's website, for all of the units of Equal Opportunity, Diversity and Inclusion, Multicultural Center and Pride Alliance, so that people know what we do and how we can serve the institution. And I've been doing a lot of different presentations like this to divisions and colleges on their data, so that their diversity and inclusion councils can address their data and create action plans from their respective data. So we are also coding the open-ended comments for our focus groups. And I mentioned the diversity and inclusion councils. We really want to have D&I councils in each college and each division. I think most of the units now have a council on which I serve as a sort of ad hoc member on all of the different councils. And we'll be working with the councils to apply the survey data for their particular unit to their action plan. So I know that was a lot of information. And so now, does anyone have any questions? I know that was a lot. So George has a question. If D&I staff at peer universities share key results of surveys like ours for comparison purposes? That's a good question. We were one of the first institutions to use the Viewfinder survey tool. It's becoming a lot more used now. Matter of fact, they actually updated their survey tool based upon the recommendations that we made at UNT as an institution. So yay, UNT. So we'd be able to benchmark with other institutions that took the Viewfinder survey specifically, but I don't know if any of our peer institutions have. So that's, but we are going to be doing this again in the next couple of years. So we'll be able to compare the survey data from when we do reassess with this survey data. Other questions? I know that was a lot.
Shani, did you say that you're looking for white men staff for focus groups?
Anybody, white men, anybody.
Okay,
employees.
Well, okay. I think some of us know some folks that we could probably nudge. So just reach out to us for sure.
That would be great, because we have tried several times now. And we're going to try again in the summertime. But it just may be indicative of they just don't really.
Will you send a reminder or a deadline when you need that, possibly, or when you want to schedule, so we can,
yeah, we will. It'll be on our website. You know, the dates that we have now passed because we couldn't get anybody to participate, but we will definitely be doing another social media blast, and yeah, you'll definitely know. It might even be in UNT today when we do another set of focus groups.
Great.
Other questions? I know people's heads are probably like, oh, because I know that was a lot of information, but you can watch it again and sort of take it apart if you missed anything. And there's everything you want to know about the Campus Inclusion Climate Survey on our website, like just everything. Fun fact, we also were the first institution, and now all of the universities that use this now do that translated the staff survey into Spanish, because how are you going to get the perspectives of all of your staff if they are not able to access the survey if it's not accessible by language. So that was another thing that we did. And the other thing that we're having a hard time recruiting, as I mentioned, are for students and employees. I think I mentioned that we are doing 2 focus groups for Latinx folks on both American born and those who are not American born, because socialization is just so different. And we're having difficulty getting non-American born students and staff as well. And so that may just be a psychological safety issue. We don't know because folks just aren't responding. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Well, I don't think we have any other questions, but we really appreciate it. This was fantastic. I learned something new every time. I know we heard this in Staff Senate, but I really enjoy hearing about the findings.
Yes, yes. And there's our website where you can find all sorts of things. The climate survey information is not under diversity and inclusion, but all of our learning and development and programming and all of that, and employee resource groups and many of the things that I talked about that we're working on is under diversity and inclusion. So we hope you will engage.
Okay, well, thanks again. We'll get this recording to you. And like we said, feel free to reach out to us for those focus groups participants.
Okay, we'll do.
Sure.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, I'm going to stop this recording.